Welcome to Sold with Webinars, a podcast that aims to uncover how the most successful experts, coaches, consultants, and e-course professionals sell their products and services with just one sales presentation or webinar. A simple sales webinar can transform the business and life of a solopreneur. And this podcast will show you how other experts just like you are generating 6 and 7 figures per year online with their webinars. So let's get started. Hey everybody, Joel Irway here with Sold with Webinars. We've got another episode coming up for you today, and oh man, I am so excited about this one. Okay, so I just got off a call, my interview with Tim Paige, and it's not every day that I get to talk to somebody not only in my local area from upstate New York, but he's also a webinar expert who actually hosts webinars for other people's behalfs. And so I was really looking forward to this because there was so much that I can talk about. Any of you who know my background, I got started in that exact space. I was hosting webinars for other people, and that's how I became an expert in webinars. And so you guys are going to learn a ton from today's conversation. Tim is absolutely crushing it with his conversion rates. And he's going to talk about how he more than quadrupled his conversions by doing a weird trick with the Q&A section and a whole lot more that we talked about. We talked about offers. We talked about offer anxiety. We talked about 4Xing your conversions. And you guys are going to love this episode. It's one of my favorite episodes that we've had to date thus far. So without further ado, let's get into the interview so you guys can take these strategies and apply them to your webinars. Tim, welcome to the show, man.
Dude, thank you for having me. It's so funny how we got connected through, a bunch of mutual friends. And it was like, we both live in upstate New York within a couple of hours of each other. Webinars are both of our full focus. Like, it's a cool thing.
It is a cool thing. I think we can stake claim in saying that, like, if you run webinars, you need to at least hire somebody from upstate New York to make this work. Because I think collectively, we've probably done tens of millions of dollars in sales on webinars. So, all right. So today is going to be a little bit different. I had my pre-interview conversation with Tim and got a little bit of background on where I want to take the conversation, but I'm going to make this one a little bit different because of how similar we are, and our backgrounds are relatively similar of how we got started in the online business space, both of us getting started hosting webinars for other people. After I have Tim kind of give his own introduction about himself, we're just going to kind of riff and fire questions back and forth and see where the conversation takes us. He did drop some serious value on how to run an effective webinar. We're going to talk about that. But after that, it's going to be really open and free flowing. So we're going to see where this takes us. But Tim, let's start out, man. Give my audience a background, who you are, why are you so special, what's so cool about Syracuse, New York, and tell us a little about yourself.
Well, most importantly, what's so cool about Syracuse, New York is our basketball team. Although not so much this coming year may not be the case, but anyway. Who I am, just a simple dude. I live in Syracuse. I'm married to the most amazing woman in the world. I have 2 sons, a about to be 4-year-old and a 9-month-old. And that's the most important thing to me. But in terms of like what you care about, I used to be a professional touring musician, traveling all over, toured I played every continental U.S. state, all sorts of stuff. But we would come home. I was telling you, it's ridiculous. We would come home and I'd have to figure out how to make money. And I didn't want to work an $8 an hour job. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but when you have a month or two to make some money and pay the bills, and then you're going to not be able to work for 3 months because you're traveling. I needed to make good money. So I got into sales. I read every sales thing. I watched every, sales training and psychology and all that stuff, and got pretty good at it, would make good money, go back on the road, come back. Well, after 7 years, I got tired. I just got tired of doing that. And I wanted to, settle down and have a family. So I got into a business. I had somebody pitch me this idea, and I jumped into it and started selling vacuums door to door. I was like,
when was this? What time frame?
This was like 2008, 2009 era. Right. Yeah. And what was interesting, they were $3,000 vacuums. And what I found interesting about it was because it was something that so few people would want to do, because it sucks. There's no doubt about it. I was like, what? I think I can take my, personality to this and do well with it. So when other people were like using these sales things that they learned, I was just being a person, and I would go into people's houses. I'd knock on their door, they'd let me in, which is crazy. And I would go in. It's good that I'm not like I would think I would be. So I'd go into the house and I would sit down and be like, "Look, I know I'm about to tell you about a $3,000 vacuum." They'd be like, "What?" And nobody would talk about the price until the end. They'd go through the whole spiel, get people all excited. I'd be like, "This is a $3,000 vacuum, and I know the chances are you're not going to buy this." And they'd be like, "Why would you say that?" I'd be like, "Well, because I realize how absurd this is, that I'm going to try to get you to buy a $3,000 vacuum." And so then I'd go through and I'd be like, "Just watch the thing, watch what I'm about to do. Like, let me show you how cool it is. I'm going to clean your room for you for free. I'm going to give you some stuff. And at the end, if for some weird reason you change your mind, cool. And if not, that's cool too." And I would just like realize how absurd it was when everybody else was trying to like be, "I'm the salesperson and you're the other person." And for whatever reason, that just really connected with people, and people would see how cool it was. And at the end, more often than not, people would buy it. So anyway, fast forward a little while, I was like, well, I can't work 12-hour days, 6 days a week. I'm exhausted. I just don't want to do that. I want to have kids. I don't want to be like an absentee dad. So I started studying online marketing. I started, studying from guys like Pat Flynn and a bunch of other people kind of in that realm, and started a podcast because I loved that. It was performance. Mm-hmm. Anyway, again, fast forward, all these little things connect. Fast forward a little while later, I have a podcast with John Lee Dumas, who has a podcast called Entrepreneur on Fire. Like, I need to introduce him. And he introduces me to Clay Collins, the CEO of Lead Pages. Clay hires me to do a podcast for Lead Pages. One day he gets super sick and has a webinar the next day. He was hosting them all at that point. It was still like a 20-person company. And he's like, "Hey, have you ever sold to anybody in like a small group?" And I'm like, "Yeah, let's do this." So I had 24 hours to prepare. 24 hours later, I host the webinar. I out-convert Clay, my first time ever hosting a webinar. And he's like, "You're doing the webinars from now on. Like, we have to do that." And since that point, I'm not with them anymore, but I hosted over 1,000 live webinars for them, generated over $10 million in revenue. And since then, I've gone off on my own, and now that's what I do, but for a number of clients on my own now. And it's been a crazy, crazy journey. But yeah, that's the kit and caboodle.
Holy crap. All right. So a couple of things that I took away from that. Number one, I'm going back to your vacuum cleaner days. I don't think I've ever seen a $3,000 vacuum, by the way. So there's a couple of things that I love about that. Like, number one, you can sell anything to anyone, like at any price. This is just like, Tim, you're awesome at sales, clearly. But like for anyone else who's trying to this goes back into like packaging and positioning and pricing your own products.
Yeah.
Where on earth has anyone ever seen a $3,000 vacuum? I mean, like
only when somebody's knocked on your door. That's
only when somebody knocks on your door. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about that real quick because it's very relevant to online sales. Mm-hmm. There's something that you talked about that we have been finding works extremely well with our webinars when we're doing cold traffic promotions, cold traffic sales. And it's you lead with the price mm-hmm. and then substantiate everything afterwards versus hiding the price up front. Yeah. For most people, when it's too expensive, they really hate you for it. It's like, "Oh my God, this $3,000, get out of my house." Mm-hmm. Right? Do you do that on your webinars now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Can you give me an example of one? Like, give me the time frame. Like, you do the introduction. Like, how long would it take for you to say, like, "I'm going to pitch you on this at the end"? Like, what does it look like?
It's quick. It's just a few minutes. I know there's a philosophy for a lot of people that they need to tell their hero's journey on the webinar first, and like, here's where I was and here's where I am now, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I've found that my style is a little bit different, and I like to. I want to build, authority quickly. And I usually do that by just, here's the results that I've gotten. And by the way, I'm also a big comic book nerd and voice actor, and I'm married and I've got 2 kids. And it's just silly stuff. I build authority quickly, but people don't want to spend a ton of time hearing my story. So I get to it pretty quickly. It's usually within, let's say, 5 minutes at most. And I justify why I'm going to tell people the price and give them the offer. I don't even just tell them the price. I do a whole offer up front. So what I do, and this is crazy, but what I do is I've coined this term offer anxiety, and this is a true story. I started asking people after webinars. I would reach out to people that had attended the webinars, and I would say, "What's one thing that you hate about webinars?" And there was this like huge disproportionate number of people. It was like 90% of people would say they hated getting on a webinar when they would spend 45 minutes not knowing what the offer was going to be, sometimes not even knowing what the person was selling. but feeling like they were being sold. And so they were like always thinking about, well, what's the offer going to be? How much is it going to be? Am I going to be able to afford it? Like, is it even going to be something I should think? And they would spend all their time focusing on that instead of focusing on whatever the content was. And we know that the content is what leads them to the sale in the first place. So they weren't focusing on the content and they were freaking out about the price, about the product, about the offer. So I said, what if we just knock out this offer anxiety, up front? Just like I did with the vacuum sales. I made people go nuts with the price. They're like, oh my God, $3,000, never going to do that. And then I could say, you're right, you're probably never going to buy it. Let's just get into this other stuff so that I can show you how I can help you. So again, so to backtrack, so about 5 minutes in, what I would say is now I'm going to do something weird, something you might not have seen on other webinars. I'm going to let you know about the offer right up front. I'm going to tell you the product, the price, the bonuses, and everything. Tell you how it works up front so that you don't have to spend the whole webinar worrying if it's right for you or if you can afford it or whatever. I want to get that out of the way up front so that now I can get into the content. And then I would do the offer. I don't go through like every module of the training course or every feature of the product, but I'll say, here's the deal. Let's say we're talking about lead pages. I would say, so lead pages is, the number one landing page builder on the market, blah, 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 blah. I talk about, just a couple of things why lead pages was great. Then I would say, there are a couple of different plans. The one I'm going to recommend is the pro plan. It's $577 a year. It comes with X, Y, and Z. And here are the bonuses that you get when you sign up before the webinar ends. Bonuses. Then I would tell them the link to go to, and I would tell them they had to buy before the webinar ends. And then at the end of the offer, I'd be like, okay, cool. Now everybody, you can like breathe a sigh of relief. You know the offer. If it's good for you, you can sign up now or later on in the webinar. It's all cool. But what I really want you to do is dive into the content with me. Focus on the content and don't worry about, having to buy anything right now. We'll get to that again later. And I would see people in the questions box on GoToWebinar or in the chat box in Webinar Ninja, and they're going, oh my gosh, that's so great. Like, I feel so much relief right now. Like, people loved hearing the offer up front. It just made people just like relax so much. It was the same thing that was happening in the houses when I was selling vacuums. They were like, oh my God, that's crazy. I'm never going to buy. Just remember, I'm never going to buy. And then at the end, they would always buy. It was the weirdest thing.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. So giving the offer up front reduces that offer anxiety, which I love that you got to coin it, create a lead magnet out of that. I'm just telling you, like how to eliminate offer anxiety. Like that's really cool.
Nice.
We have been doing, so we won't do the full offer. I'll tell them that there's an offer at the end.
Yep.
And I'll tell them what it, like just the name of it. I don't go into the detail, but it does help reduce that offer anxiety a little bit. But I love what you do. It makes so much sense because like there's, from a presenter standpoint, I remember when I was first giving presentations, I was following a script that was like, once we got into the pitch, it took us like 25 to 30 minutes to even reveal the price. And like, we would get people be like, just tell me the price. Yep. And we always thought that was a good thing. And I'm like, I don't know. But like, I didn't really know how to fix it. I'm like, we were making sales. So I'm like, whatever. Like, I'm not going to mess with it. But I do think that like, because people know you're going to be pitched something, they know like, you got to be doing this as a business. Like, you spent money on paid ads. Like, they're not stupid. You can't insult your customers' intelligence. Like, that's the worst way. It's the worst way to start a relationship with your audience. And so I love it, man. I love it.
And a lot of that came from, for me, a lot of that came from like, I would be on a webinar being like, God, will you just tell me, I want to know if I can, this, especially early on in my business, I want to know if I can afford it. Like I wanted to know if it was something I was going to be able to buy. And if not, that's fine. At least I would still go, well, man, Joel gives great training. And later on down the road, when I'm ready, I'm going to go to Joel and like buy his thing, because he was upfront and honest.
There would be, oh my goodness. I just came up, and maybe you do this. Tell me if you've done this.
Sure.
But I'm always wondering, like, how can we capture the most bang for your buck with social currency? And so like, even if you reveal the price up front and somebody can't afford it, it's like, I would then try and leverage that to be like, there you go. You know the price. Now I'm going to deliver the content. So let me prove to you that like this content is awesome because I really want to build this relationship. So hopefully down the road you buy again.
Yeah.
And then I would kind of like frame it to be like at the end, it'd be like, if you love this content, even if you're not going to buy it, it would really appreciate if you shared this with your audience or whatever. Like do some sort of like share, because there's so much value in social currency. My good friend Adam Linkenauer coined that, and he's launching something called social currency, which is leveraging these non-buyers and still getting money from them. But that's
I love that. Awesome. And, it's funny because a lot of times I'll do a webinar training. One of my clients is Webinar Ninja, and we do a training on kind of how to host your first webinar. It's kind of 101 level stuff. But one of the things that I find is that when I tell people that I give the offer up front, they're like, I've never done a webinar, or I've done like 5 webinars. I don't know if I feel comfortable giving the offer up front. What I'll tell them is, okay, that's okay. Give them the price up front. You don't even have to tell them what the product is or does. Like if it's an info course, you don't have to tell them what's in the course. If it's software, you don't have to tell them what the software does. But you can just say, look, at the end, I'm going to give you some awesome bonuses. I've got this offer for my product. My product is called X, Y, and Z. It costs $19.97. And, don't freak out about it. Just let's get into the content. I just wanted to tell you up front so that you can go right now in your head, I don't have $2,000. I'm not going to do it. Or I do, and I'll consider it down the road, whatever, right? Because what you do is when you do that at the end, beyond the fact that people are like, oh my gosh, she's like hiding the price. When you do it at the end, what ends up happening is you build up all this goodwill. You give them tons of great content. You lead them to the sale if you've done a good job with the webinar. Like everything in the content was good. And they go, okay, if this content is that good, then the product has to be amazing. Then you go, it's $2,000. People go, holy crap, $2,000. Oh man, that's so much money. And all they can think about through your whole pitch is like $2,000. Oh my God. But when you say it up front, you have the whole webinar where they put $2,000 aside. It's like content, awesome. Well, what am I getting for $2,000? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they're focused on the content and the product itself. And it just totally moves the conversation away from $2,000 as opposed to sticker shock. And I have 10 minutes to get over that sticker shock. Instead, I have an hour to get over it.
Yeah. I mean, you have a longer opportunity where you've presented the offer to them. I love it, man. There's no reason why I shouldn't be doing this. Like, absolutely not. Very cool. Okay. So moving right along, I want to talk about this technique that I hate using the word hack. Like I absolutely hate using the word hack.
It's so secret.
Yeah. Let's talk about the technique that you shared with me before we jumped on this. How did you 4X your conversions? Like I've never split tested an actual webinar, like done an official split test of a webinar, but you did with a huge audience, 2 huge audiences. Tell that story and tell the results.
Yeah. Okay. So I had this theory. So for a long time, ever since probably like webinar number 2, I've been answering questions throughout the entire webinar. Okay. And that's just revealing the secret up front, right? I answer questions throughout the whole webinar. I don't wait until the Q&A to answer questions. I had just kind of done it because I thought, well, this is a better experience. Like if I'm on a webinar and I have a question about something that's being talked about, I want that question answered as quickly as possible. So I started doing that. And now it's not easy to do with a ton of people, but I've been doing that ever since. Well, I wanted to test that theory. And so I took an opportunity where we had a huge affiliate partner that was promoting the webinar. This person, I won't name names, but this person picked 2 dates. So we would always have like a Wednesday and a Thursday, and it was the same time both days, the same promotion, the same webinar registration page, everything was the same. There was, we tried to keep it as clean as split test as possible. And on day 1, I didn't answer questions until the Q&A. It was just content all the way through. This person was answering some questions in the questions box or whatever, but I didn't answer questions, in my presentation. And then the next day, I answered questions throughout the entire webinar. We quadrupled our sales on the second webinar. And it was, by the way, they were both maxed out. Like no more people could join. It was go to webinar and it was the limit. So we had 1,000 people on live on both webinars. Just absolute like crazy increase in revenue. And I have found that there are very few situations where that's not possible. The only time that I think it's harder to answer questions throughout the content is if the webinar is kind of like a story from start to finish. It's kind of like the tactics aren't really there, but you need to get the whole picture of the story. So like asking a question doesn't really make sense because the story is going to answer the question later. There are some webinars like that, and that's hard to do. But I have personally never hosted a webinar where I couldn't answer questions throughout the content.
Unbelievable. So how many times would you stop to allow for questions to be answered? Like when you do this versus doing it at the end?
For the first 100 webinars, it was just whenever. It was just, I'd be like, in the middle of a sentence and a good question would pop up and be like, oh, somebody wanted to know. And I would like go answer that question. I found that super distracting. That takes away big time from your flow. And so
that was my objection is like, in my mind, that's how I would see it. Because I would actually tell all my clients, like, oh, do I answer questions? I'm like, no, stay until the end. Because anyway.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what I started doing after a little while is when I would build my deck, I would, in my brain, be marking off opportunities to stop and answer some questions. A lot of times my webinars are like step 1, part 1, piece 1, whatever, tactic 1, 2, 3, 4. And I would break it down like that. I found it's just so much easier to digest as an attendee. But what I would do is like in step one, tactic one, thing one, I would be into it and I would explain something. And then I would be like, okay, this is a point where probably if I'm attending, I've got questions. And I would stop and I'd be like, you know what, while I'm here, blah, blah, blah has a question, blah, blah, blah. And I'm kind of picky about what questions I answer. I try to answer all of them, but when you've got 1,000 people on a webinar, it's not happening. Mm-hmm. So I try to kind of strategically answer questions. And I tell people up front, ask questions throughout the entire webinar. I'm going to try my best to answer them, but please note, I will not answer a question that's not relevant to the topic of the content we're talking about at that point in the webinar. I'll save that until the end. So, if I would be talking about, I don't know, list building, and somebody would have a question about how to, optimize their sales page or something, I wouldn't answer that because that would completely take away from what we're talking about. But if I'm talking about list building, somebody's like, yeah, but what's the best lead magnet? Oh, great. I'm so glad you asked. Boom. And then I'm providing value based on what we're talking about then. And it just always seemed to enhance the value, increase the engagement, increase the conversion rate, and people would stay longer than ever before. So I'm seeing right now on average that 95% of the people that show up at the start of the webinar will stay for 75 minutes or longer.
That's awesome.
Which is insane.
So how long are your webinars? About 90 minutes usually?
They're 90 minutes on average. I'm finding now that more of my webinars are trending towards 60 minutes. I prefer longer webinars myself, but I'm finding that with some of the clients I'm working with, 60 minutes is more than enough. But it really just depends on, the client and the topic. A lot of people be like, should I do 60 minutes? Should I do 90? Should I do 2 hours? It just depends on what you're talking about and how involved it is. If you're speaking to a more 101 level audience, shorter is sometimes better, but again, not always the case. Like lead pages, we had a good mix. More of the people we were talking to were 101 level, but we were doing a 90-minute webinar. I have another client we were talking about earlier who that audience is very much not 101 level. They're much more advanced. And yet that webinar is 60 minutes. So it's really, it just comes down to the content itself, the topic itself, and what does it need?
What we're finding is shorter is almost always better in terms of conversions.
Interesting.
I always ramble on. So we're going to get to the next part where I'm really interested to hear your answer on this, but I'll finish my thought here.
Yeah.
I always ramble on. And so now I've got copywriters and editors who like their job is to chop all my stuff in half because it's still more effective. Like,
sure.
A lot of times, like I think when people register for a webinar, they've naturally blocked out an hour. Like it's just like, okay, it's a meeting, it's an event, it's an hour. And so even though they could probably stay a little bit longer, between 60 and 90 minutes, that's what we're seeing as the sweet spot too. We had one webinar that was like 2 hours because it had like a fucking 30 to 45 minute pitch, which it still converted. I mean, we made a ton of money off of it, but I'm like, I look back on it now and I'm just like, how did that work? Like, how did that work? But it did. And so that's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, there's 2 questions that I'm really anxious to hear your answers on. Number 1 is positioning as a webinar host, like for other people's products.
Yeah.
So take me back to when Clay reached out to you and he was like, hey, got a webinar tomorrow. Like, how did you position yourself and like, what's the secret behind that?
I guess one of the things to note is that all of my clients but one are software companies. Okay. Much easier to do. It's way easier to be like, I'm a member of the team at this company, right? So a lot of my friends have like, personal brands and they have teams and their teams can write content and do all sorts of stuff. But it would be weird. Like just for example, I mentioned Pat Flynn earlier. It would be tougher to be like, hey, I'm Tim Paige, the whatever webinar guy for Pat Flynn. Be like, wait a minute, what? Well, Pat's not doing this content. Not impossible. Like I said, I do have I have one client who is a personal brand, and I'm hosting this person's webinars. But it's tougher to do. But what I often will do is when I'm presenting, if there's a story that's relevant to the brand that was often like that person, the founder's story. I never try to turn it into my story. I think that is so disingenuous and it completely destroys your relationship. And I'm 100% like, I will not tell something that's not true. I am not going on a webinar and doing that. So what I do is it's our team's story. And I'll tell a story and be like, when we were doing this, which is true, we as a collective company were doing this thing. It just, the founder of the company was the person doing it, but it's our company, right? That's how I presented all the stories. And I would say, I've heard, Clay, for example, if I'm talking about lead pages, I've heard Clay tell the story of blah, 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 blah. And it was always presented like that. And people are always cool with that, because if we're going to have somebody training us from some large company, it's not going to be the CEO of that company.
Right.
And so that's fine. That's been the positioning for me so far. And yeah, I've just had this challenge today. We're starting a new webinar with one of my clients, and we had that challenge where we were like, so much of this comes from what you personally have done for your brand, that we have to change everything to be what we've done and what he has done. But so far, we found it's actually converting great. We're seeing 38% conversion rate for that one. So
damn.
Yeah.
What are the average price points that you sell on these webinars? Like, what do they range from?
Right now, my range is from, let's see, my lowest price point is $397, which is a little low for webinars. I find that's a tougher one, but we're getting great results, so I'm not messing with it. And then I think my highest price point right now is $2,000.
And that's normally cold traffic to the webinar?
Yep, I'd say it's like 70% cold traffic, 30%, retargeting and that kind of thing. But yeah, mostly cold traffic.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you just debunked a major myth that people have, that they have this. So like I do a ton in the information marketing space, where there's this mystical number of $997. Everyone's like, I want a $997 course. I want a $997 course. I want an evergreen webinar. I want to sell it. I'm like, pump the brakes. Like let's just chill out for a little bit. But great. So you can sell $2,000 from cold traffic webinars. Awesome.
Oh yeah, all day long. I would say like the most common. My client that we're doing, that's information product, that's personal branding. We're doing a $1,497 product right now, and that's been the most successful one. We've tested a bunch of different price points, but $1,497 is the one that's working the best. But again, I mean, I feel like so much of the time it's so arbitrary. Like you mentioned, like the $997 is the magical price point, but what's that getting somebody? And if you can show somebody some ridiculous result from it, then what's wrong with $1,997? What's wrong with $5,000? I have one client that's selling a $5,000 product on their webinar. I created their webinar. I'm not hosting it because it's a personal brand. I just built their webinar for them. They're selling a $5,000 product. Now they're not pitching it directly on the webinar. They're pitching a consult and then getting on the call. But still, you can sell most things from webinar. And I'll give one other example. I recently went to an event that's really interesting. It was a webinar event that On24 puts on called Webinar World. It was really interesting because it was out of my...
What is it? Oh, On24?
On24. It's a webinar platform, but it's a real enterprise level webinar platform. They charge like $10,000. It's really high end. And most of the people that were at this event were from Microsoft and like these big, massive enterprise companies. And that world is entirely different from the world we live in. They have no idea how to pitch on a webinar. Like no idea. All of it is content. If you'd like to hear more about our stuff, we'll schedule, like no idea how to pitch. But I found it really interesting that, they're selling these massive enterprise solutions, $30K a year plus, like really high-end stuff on webinars. And what they're doing is they're getting leads from their webinars, marketing qualified leads, and then getting them to the sales reps and doing it that way. So when people are like, oh man, I don't know, $2,000 products don't sell. I'm like, what? You might have to get creative. We have a mutual friend, somebody who actually, I think was the first person to connect us. I won't name names because I don't know, but he right now is pitching a much more expensive product, but he's not selling it direct on webinar. He's pitching the application. People apply and then they get on the phone with him. And then he sells his product, and it's awesome. And the webinar that he's running is amazing. Yeah. It's so good. So.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. I helped him with his webinar, and he was doing a direct selling one too, and then he switched to the application style. Yep. And he's got a really good webinar, and I know that he's killing it right now. So when we go application style, we always just go straight automated because I mean, like, you could do live if you want, but like this is such a different topic of conversation. But anyway, okay. So tell me a little bit about so you build webinars for your clients, right? Do you write them for them?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Okay, cool. Do you script?
No, never.
Really?
I never use a script. I don't have any fundamental issue with a script, but for my style, reading from a script just doesn't work for me. I like to just go with the flow.
I think you're right. It's very performance-based. Me being an engineer, my background is in engineering, I need to read from a script.
Yeah.
But I don't have a difficult time with voice inflections, and I can make it sound like I'm not reading from a script, but I'm a very step by step by step brain. And so like I have to be like,
and it's great for your clients. It's great for your clients too, because when you're building a webinar for somebody else to host, having a script so that you can put your thoughts on things into that for them to assimilate is great. I've had a few people that have come to me asking me like, I need to host my webinars, but will you build it for me? I want a script, and I won't do it. This is before I knew you, so now I've got somebody to send them to. But I don't want to write a script because I don't think that I'd be serving somebody, me personally, because I don't write scripts for my own webinars. So if I was to do that for somebody else, it'd be like, I'm experimenting when you're giving me a ton of money to do it.
Yeah.
So I'd rather not experiment on your dime. I don't feel comfortable doing that. But again, I have a weird style. Like I have got a friend who, when he writes his webinars are 9 slides. Like that's it. He has 9 slides, and he'll go like step 1 in the webinar, and there's 3 bullet points, and he'll go, all right, bullet point 1. And then he'll just talk about it. He just talks, and here's my content from bullet point 1, then bullet point 2, then bullet point 3. He's got 10,000 customers paying on a monthly recurring basis for his software product. And that's how he built almost all of those customers. That's how he got almost all of them. Me, my slide decks are like 140 slides. Like I go bonkers with slides, but that works for him. So my point in all that is like, I don't script, but I'm also a weird person, and I build pretty much most things I'm going to say are on a slide in the form of like a picture or at least like a phrase that will trigger my brain to say something.
That's awesome. Yeah, we have insanely long slide decks too. And it's the way that I was trained. Like just that's how I was brought into it. And it'd be really difficult for me to create a 9-slide presentation. I wouldn't ever feel comfortable delivering that.
And you have the problem that I have, that I would just be blabbering on forever. I'd get into a slide and be like, okay, 3 bullet points. I need to go off the top of my head. I would go nuts. My webinars would be 3 hours long.
Yep. Yeah. And so like for me, the reason why I script is because I want to make sure I'm controlling the conversation, because I can't see my audience. It's not like we're delivering this in a live room. I can't see their feedback. So I want to make sure that everything I say is strategic and it makes sense. So like scripting, it takes us a long time. Like it really does, because we go through and now we have to do edits and reviews. We're always tweaking our process. But when we write webinars for other people, like we don't want any sort of interpretation when we hand it off to them. So
if you were writing a webinar for yourself right now for a product that you were going to promote, would you script it for yourself?
I would. Yeah. So we are running, I am running weekly live webinars for myself, my own program right now. Yeah, my own webinar program, and it is scripted. We just ran the second live one yesterday, and it did okay. It was a very, very small audience, just to my a segment of my internal list. But I script it so I stay on point, because if there's no script there, I'll go all over the place, and then I'll start stuttering. Like you can notice when I go off script and when I stay on script, because my brain is just all over the place.
Sure.
So I do it just to keep myself on track. So cool. Okay. So you don't script your presentations.
Nope.
Last thing I want to talk about. All right. So now we're going back to the offer, because this is just completely fascinating to me, because offers are so important. They're the most, in my opinion, they're the most important part of your entire presentation. And when you put the offer in right away, you eliminate that fear, that anxiety. And I think the trust level with you, the presenter, and whoever the company is that you represent, I think it just goes up tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
I always tell my clients, like, you cannot insult your customer's intelligence, especially if this is a cold traffic webinar, because most people aren't going to buy on the webinar. Like they're going to come back later onto the webinar, or they're going to come back and buy later. Like do not ruin that relationship. So when you go into your pitch now, how long is your pitch? Like how does it differ from like a normal style offer creation?
Well, so what I use is I use the ending pitch towards the end of the webinar as an opportunity to expand. Because a lot of the time, again, it's software, but a lot of the time, if it's not something that's kind of ubiquitous software like Lead Pages, I mean, most people that are in marketing at least have a sense of what Lead Pages is. But if it's something that's a little bit different, a tool that's maybe newer, they might not have ever heard of it. So I'm making my pitch at the beginning and people think like, oh, this is my time to buy. But they're like, well, what the heck is the software? And if I go, oh, it does this, this, and this, I'm like, okay, they're not going to buy yet. So then throughout the webinar, I am referencing as I go back to it, it's like, by the way, this software is going to make this easier to do because of X, Y, and Z. So I just told you how to do this thing. But if you want to do it really easily, this software will do it for you. And remember, I offered you that bonus. So, and then I go on to the next thing. Like my pitch is just baked into the content as I go. And that works the same way for info stuff as well. So if you're doing, piece number 1, and I'm going, step 1 is do this. Here's why you do it. Here's the pieces of doing it. And remember, my course is going to make it even easier because I'm going to go even deeper and we'll hold your hand. But let's get to that later, step 2, right? But to answer your question more clearly, then I get to the end. My pitch is a little bit longer then. In the beginning, it's probably 3 to 5 minutes. In the end, it's more like 10 minutes because I'm going.
That's really short. In my opinion.
it is short.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. But again, the reason it's short is especially with software. I'm demoing software within the content because I'm saying, here's what to do. Here's the specifics of why we're doing it. And then here's how to do it using this software. With software, it's a lot easier to bake it into it so that then by the end, I'm not going to go do a demo because I've demoed it as we go. Whereas with information, you need to tell them more. Here's what's in the course. Here are the modules. And so I think the information product that we're doing now, it's probably a 15-minute long pitch at the end. So it's still shorter than a lot. But I have a structure for it. I'll share the structure. I don't talk about this a lot, but I have a structure specifically when it comes to the offer. There's a transition. So the transition is I'm not redefining the problem. I'm not revisiting all the content. A lot of people spend 10, 15 minutes like revisiting the content. And I get the philosophy why, and it can work. But what I do is I say, you know what? At the beginning of the webinar, I told you about the offer. I told you that I wouldn't leave you without the opportunity to get more help from me. I want to make good on that promise. So let's talk again about what you're going to get. And what I do is I go, okay, let's say it's an information product. And let's say I'm talking about a webinar course that I have or something. I would say, so I want to introduce you to Webinar Power Up or whatever, right? I want to introduce you to my webinar course. What we're going to do is, in Webinar Power Up, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to go deep into those things, the insights that I found from over, 1,100 webinars that I've personally hosted that have generated well over $10 million in revenue. I'm going to share with you the specific steps of each piece of the webinar. So when you go build your webinar and host your webinar, you'll feel completely confident to do it. Like I mentioned in the beginning, Webinar Power Up is $19.97 or whatever the heck the price is. And because I want to hook it up, here are the bonuses. And then I'm selling the bonuses. Bonus 1 is this. I'm going to go in depth on that. Bonus 2 is this. I'm going to go in depth on that. Bonus 3 is this. You only get the bonuses when you buy before the webinar. Let me show you what you need to do to get it. And then we click on the buttons. If there's buttons, if there's a link, I go to the link. I fill out the form with them. I show them exactly what to do right there. But I haven't done an in-depth walkthrough of my product yet. Because the next thing I do is I go, all right, let's get into some Q&A. And I start my Q&A with like 2 to 3 questions that are buying questions. And 90% of the time, I'm getting the same buying questions. We know what they are. We know what the questions are going to be. So I'll go right to the first biggest objection. And so like with lead pages, the big kind of question or objection was always like, can I use this with more than one website? Because a lot of tools are like specific. You can only use it on one website. And lead pages' big selling point was you could use it on unlimited websites, unlimited domains, unlimited businesses. So I would be like, so-and-so wanted to know if they can use this with more than one website. Well, we have this unlimited, right? And then I'd answer that. And then I'd do 2 more buying questions. Then I would go to 2 to 3 non-buying questions that were just based on the content. So it's, whatever, something, hey, in step 2, you talked about this, how would I do this for whatever? And then I would answer that. And then I go into a few more buying questions. And the first buying question I go back into is like, can you tell me more about your program? Can you tell me more about your software, your product? And that's when I would go deep. That's the deep dive on the product where I go, module 1, we're going to do blah, 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 blah. Because what happens is when people have questions, they have these objections at the end. And they have all these questions. And if you can answer those questions, they're going to be ready to buy. If I spend too long pitching, they feel like their question isn't going to be answered. So they drop off. Mm-hmm. And you lose that person that might have bought. And I know that we can get them in the follow-up sequence, but we're going to do a better job if we can get them live. So I do it right then and there. I get to the Q&A as quickly as I can. I answer those buying questions. I answer the content questions. And then I go deep dive. And for me, I've found that that's like if you use your Q&A like an opportunity to overcome objections, I found that that's kind of the magic that closes those last minute sales.
Dude, I love it. Like I love short offers, and we have been we're testing a new offer structure internally that has been working very, very well. We specifically position the objections within the content of the webinar.
Yep.
And so we conquer them there. but we still take too long. I know we take too long to get to the actual reveal. And so like internally, I've been just kind of like stuck, like, okay, how can we shorten this without, reducing, our effectiveness on the webinar? And so, man, this was a lot of fun. Like this was really good. Two webinar experts riffing and sharing our knowledge. All right.
The problem is you get us on for too long, and we're gonna get like nerdy. It's just gonna get
I know we should have our own like webinar about webinars and just like just reveal all. So do you do anything with the funnel?
I don't.
Okay.
And the reason why
neither do I.
Yeah, I've got a really specific, and I'm sure you do too. I'm a huge fan of stacking the best of the best with the best of the best instead of generalists. And I can build a funnel, sure, and it will be decent and it'll convert pretty well. But I know I'm not the best of the best, so I'd rather you get the best of the best person who's going to run your ads and set up your automation and do all that stuff. Get a ton of great people on the webinar, and I will knock them down for you. But I know that when it comes to like all that stuff, I'm decent, but I'm not the best.
Mm-hmm. All right. Last question. What's the highest conversion rate that you've ever had live on a webinar, and what was the price point? You don't have to reveal the product, but like name your golden goose.
My golden goose, well, that was reasonable because I have had a webinar that a partner promoted that there were 7 people on and 6 of them bought, but that doesn't really count.
Yep.
But like in terms of like a reasonable amount of people on a webinar was 50%, which is, I feel like it's not all that impressive of a number, but 50% is pretty good. There were 400 something people on the webinar.
You had 200 people buy.
Yes. And this is, okay, so this is the best part because I've told this story a couple times. Right over here, I have a booth. I'm a voice actor as well. And so like I do all my recording, my soundproof booth over here. But it was we were building it. We were in the middle of building it. So I couldn't actually do webinars in here. I had to do it in my closet, my walk-in closet. And for whatever reason, I was just like out of sorts. I'm doing this webinar. There's all these people on it. And 4 minutes in, hiccups hit. Like bad hiccups. Like, I just had my wisdom teeth out, so I'm going to demonstrate this and hopefully it doesn't hurt. But I literally, like, every 4 words I'd go, like bad hiccups, really bad. 4 minutes into a 90-minute webinar and I'm dying. So I'm like, oh God. Okay. So I wait 5 minutes. I keep doing the presentation. I'm like, it's going to go away, but I'm going, I want to teach you all about how you can do this. It was brutal. And so after 5 minutes, I was just like, you know what? I got to call this out. So I go, okay, folks, you might have noticed I've got nasty hiccups right now. Nothing I can do about it. You're not here to scare me. So there's nothing I can do to get rid of these hiccups. If it's too annoying, I totally get it and you want to drop off, that's fine. Well, we'll get you on another webinar at some point. But if you stick around, the content is going to be worth hearing me go every few seconds, right? What ended up happening was almost nobody dropped off. There was a hashtag, and God, I wish I could remember it, but it was like Tim's hiccup webinar or something that was going around. It was this ridiculous thing, and we ended up converting at 50%, whether it was because of like sympathy or just people were like, this guy's so real and he's like plowing through this. It was unbelievable, but no question, the highest converting webinars I've ever had. I had the hiccups, I had the flu, I had strep throat. Those were the highest converting webinars I ever had. And it's so like when people are like, well, you're a voice actor, so like you know how to do, and you're like, I'm like, look, the best webinars I've ever had, I sounded like garbage. And I think it just, people want to connect with a real person, and that's it.
What was the price point of the offer at 50%?
$577.
Wow.
So it wasn't but it was $577 a year, so it's recurring, right? It's software.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Reasonable thing. And I thought it was awesome.
Oh God, man, that's awesome. That is awesome. All right, so we talked about a ton today. I love this. I love this conversation so much. So we talked about how you basically transferred your $3,000 door-to-door vacuum sales techniques to putting the offer up front, then substantiating that with the value, eliminating the what did we call it? Offer anxiety.
Offer anxiety. Yep.
You got to coin that, man. Coin it. Maybe you already have, but I'm telling you, that's got to be a lead magnet for you.
Yeah.
Offer anxiety. So eliminating offer anxiety. We talked about how you 4x conversions with your Q&A technique, right? We talked about how you structure the offers and the time frame for how you position your webinars. You don't script any, which is fascinating. This works incredibly well for software, which is awesome. We've done a couple software webinars, but it's been always tied into info products.
Sure.
Do you ever sell out just flat software on webinars? Well, actually, that's what Lead Pages was, right? It was just the software.
Yeah, that's most of my stuff is just software. Although, you heard about a webinar that I had hosted where we gave the information. We actually were selling the information because the information was useful without the software, but almost required having the software. And so people would buy the software to get the information for free. We did that with Lead Pages a couple times and it was incredibly successful, but I hated the webinar itself. Like I did not like hosting it. So we did it, we got some results and then we scrapped it because I don't want to do a webinar I hate, especially over and over and over.
Cool.
You know what we didn't talk about though?
What's up?
I believe we use the same headset.
Yeah, that's right.
Sennheiser PC8, like $40 headset, but it sounds great on webinars. This is all I use now.
That's right. Yeah, they're really awesome. I used to use the blue microphone, the blue Snowball.
Mm-hmm.
It started tweaking out and it killed my neck because I always had to lean forward. I even had the boom, but like, oh my goodness, I won't go without a headset. Yeah,
I pace. I need a headset. I pace. I can't sit at a desk.
When I'm on a sales call or if I'm on the phone talking to somebody, I'll walk around the entire house and I'll just like, I'll drive my wife nuts. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, shh, close the sale.
I love it.
But awesome, Tim. So where can people find out more information about you? Where can they go sign up to your list and connect?
Yeah. So there's right now my website is timpagewebinars.com. And I'm working on my own little webinar training only because two things. One, I've never personally launched an information product and I want to do it just to get the experience of personally launching one for myself. Mm-hmm. And, there are a lot of people that are like, can you help me with my webinars? But they can't afford to hire me to actually do it. And I'd like to help them too. So I am building my own and it's going to be at webinarpowerup.com. Nice. And right now I'm when we hop off this call, I'm going to go and put my lead magnet up there for you. It's my webinar creation checklist.
Cool.
It's just a simple checklist, but just to keep you on track when you're building your webinar.
Awesome, dude. Well, from two upstate New Yorkers, two webinar hosts, two webinar pros, two webinar experts. Hopefully you guys got some value out of this. I got a ton of value. And I always love talking to people who are super smart in this space. And dude, go check out Tim's stuff. Go check out his website, timpagewebinars.com, and give him a shout out and give him a follow. The dude's smart. Hopefully he proved to you that he's worth his weight in gold today. But yeah, dude, Tim, we got to do something else together. I mean, there's too much potential up here in upstate New York.
Totally agree. Yeah, we definitely have to. And keep the podcast up, man. It's great. It's something that's needed. Not enough people sharing this wisdom. So keep it up.
You got it, man. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for tuning in. We've got more content coming up. So go check out Tim's stuff, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to giving you the next one. You can also follow and watch the behind-the-scenes look at how I'm personally launching a brand new 6- and 7-figure product from scratch at soldwithwebinars.com/TV. And if you'd like to come hang out with other fellow experts, join our Facebook group at soldwithwebinars.com/experts. Join us next time, and I'll see you there.